I have to take us through the small cards and the court cards, really, before I get into the really meaty, juicy, fun sexual alchemy thing of the trumps. You've got a handout there that shows two wheels, and let's first of all, how do planets and zodiac signs get assigned to the 36 small cards of the tarot? And you've got two wheels there. Let's start there. Now, one good thing about the Thoth Tarot is they have the titles of the small cards written right on the cards themselves. So that when you pull the Three of Wands, it says virtue. When you pull the Two of Cups, it says love. When you pull the Nine of Swords, it says despair and cruelty. And so you can instantly read people's cards with the Thoth Tarot, and that's just what I did as a young Rosicrucian. I had that Thoth deck, and I could pretend I was reading people's cards. And there was a wealthy woman at the Rosicrucians who hosted a salon every Sunday afternoon at her house in the marina, and she would invite the local Rosicrucians and pagans and local spoon benders and different kinds of psychic people, and she would feed them lunch and wine. And every afternoon or every Sunday afternoon I would sing for my supper by reading people's tarot cards. And I found out that I could just really fake it really good with the Thoth Tarot. And after 30 years of faking it, I figured, well, maybe I'm not faking it anymore. Okay. Why would one card be called love and another card be despair and cruelty? And actually, the small cards are, from a Kabbalistic point of view, the most practical, the most in your face bit of information about your practical everyday life. You know, in magic, big concepts, big spiritual beings are very easy to work with, very easy to invoke, very easy to evoke. The bigger a spiritual entity is, the easier it is to get it to come to pay a visit. The four archangels, Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel, that most magicians conveniently work with, it's easy. Just face east, standing on the face of the earth, and everything between north and south is Raphael. Okay. As a matter of fact, it's hard to get him to go away. In Enochian magic, it's easy to kick on this little master board, the Tablet of Union, okay, which represents like the archangel of archangels of the elements and everything the elements are connected to. It's easy. There's just two calls. It kicks it up just like that. In the tarot, there aren't really 56 small cards. There's only 4 small cards, the 4 aces. All the other small cards, all the other court cards live inside that ace. It's easy to get the big stuff. But the big stuff is so general that it's hard to do something practical with it. Does that make sense? You gotta, to get something practical done, you got to go to, well, if an archangel is the president, then you got to go to a general, which might be an angel. Then a spirit or intelligence under that angel is a lower and lower person on the hierarchy, and they're the ones that really do the grunt work of the universe. But they don't do the grunt work for you because they got an angel that they work for. And that angel has an archangel that he or she works for. And that archangel has a specific aspect of deity that it works for. And so a magician, this is why a Kabbalistic magician starts by invoking a specific section of deity to evoke a specific archangel, to evoke a specific angel, to put a specific spirit or intelligence to work to actually do the grunt work that you want done. You don't go to Raphael and say, make Tina, the girl next door, fall in love with me. You have a specific angel that's just for, or a specific spirit that's just for that. But you start with Raphael. Raphael, I want this guy down below here to do some work. Can you go ahead and give him the day off to do that? And you go to the angel that is his supervisor and says, I'm going to be using here Darkiel to make this woman fall in love with me. Okay, Darkiel can do it. And do you see how the hierarchy worked? Well, that's just how these small cards are. As a matter of fact, those same angels live in these tarot cards. Archangels live in aces. Angels live in court cards. Spirits live in small cards. So anyway, on our the reason we have 36 small cards instead of 40 is because we've knocked the aces out of consideration because they all live in the aces. That leaves us 36. And there just happen to be 36 10-degree periods in the zodiac. And by golly, they have to stand for the 36 decades. It's not that they're attributed to it. I'm sorry, if you got 36 anythings, they're going to be attributed one way or another to the 36 decans of the zodiac. So let's start with the wheel on the left-hand side and sort of go to the 9 o'clock position there where it says Aries, Cardinal Fire, and Wands. And in that little slice of pie there for Aries, you see the numbers 2, 3, and 4 as we move counterclockwise. Are we all there? Well, that would be the 2, 3, and 4 of Wands, because Wands is fire and Aries is cardinal fire in the zodiac. Does that make sense? Now, there's a little legend above the top there. It says each of the 36 small cards rule one decan, or 10-degree period of the zodiac. The 2s, 3s, and 4s rule the cardinal signs. And the cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. The 5, 6, and 7s, or in other words, the middle sequence of those 9 cards, rule the fixed signs of the zodiac. Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Taurus. And the emblems of those fixed signs of the zodiac will appear in the corners of a couple tarot cards. You know, the angel of Aquarius and the eagle of Scorpio and the bull of Taurus and the lion of Leo appear usually in most decks in the Wheel of Fortune card and the Universe card. Thoth Tarot, it's a little different. But those are the fixed signs of the zodiac. And then the last 3 cards of the sequence of each suit, the 8s, 9s, and 10s, rule the mutable signs of the zodiac. Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo. Now, if you, for those of you who aren't familiar with astrology, the signs of the zodiac are broken up into elements: fire, water, air, and earth, and they're also divided in their capacity as cardinal signs, fixed signs, or mutable signs. And it's like cardinal signs are the first expression of their element. Okay, in the United States, at high school football games, they make this big hoop of paper at the beginning of the game, and the cheerleaders bring out this big paper hoop. And when the team runs out onto the field, they burst through this paper hoop. It's just like every game they break a giant paper hymen, and the whole team comes rushing onto the field. And that's like what cardinal is. So if Aries is cardinal fire, okay, it's that aspect of fire that is just now bursting out onto the scene. It's like, hi, I'm fire. Okay, well, you take its word for it because it's Aries, but you're not quite sure what this fire is yet because you haven't got a chance to know it very well. It's just the fire that first punches you in the nose and says, I'm fire. Okay, but the fixed sign of fire, which is what? Leo. Leo is the fixed, the cherubic sign. Leo is right in the middle of the sequence of fireness. And so Leo's been hanging around in fire, and Leo just sits there being all fire-like and say, well, you know, sorry you had a run-in with my friend Aries over there, but if you really want to know what fire is like, just look at me, because I'm just sitting here nailed to that definition of fire. I'm fixed fire. When you look fire up in the dictionary, you got Leo's picture. And then mutable is where the dynamics of fire is starting to be very compatible with any other influence. Sagittarius is, yeah, I'm fire, but I'm flexible. And I got such a kick out of the ritual that you guys did where different characters played different aspects of your lodge's natal chart. And there was so much Sag, just so much different planets in Sag. And it's just so perfect to see them expressed, artistically. So no offense against Sag, but do you see what I mean? The cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So 2s, 3, 4s are all the cardinal signs. 5, 6, 7s are all of the fixed signs, and the 8s, 9, 10s are all the mutable signs. We start there at 9 o'clock, move counterclockwise, starting with Aries, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way around to Pisces, and the 10 of Cups at the end of Pisces there. Isn't that clean? That's just very clean. And so those cards stand for those specific degrees of the zodiac and those approximate days of the year, of every year, that those degrees of the zodiac cover. So there are actual astrological characteristics to each of the decans, and you can buy a decan book and get little definitions of, because they represent that part of the year so we could almost make a deck of small cards with just the divinatory meanings of the decans and say, well, that's why the 2 of Cups is love. Okay? But there's more to it than that. Each of the signs of or each of the elements actually represents a sephira on the tree of life, or each of those numbers, 2s through 10s, represents a sephira on the tree of life. And you've got a tree of life diagram there. And imagine that there's 4 of those trees of life. And again, tomorrow we're going to go in painful detail about the meanings of these planetary spheres and such. But imagine 4 trees of life, all on top of each other, one for wands, one's for cups, one's from swords, and one's for discs. And each of those sephira has one of the small cards there. Do we see how the 4 2s, 4 3s, 4 4s, 4 5s, see how they're laid out there like that? We'll talk about the court cards in just a second. And so there's a Kabbalistic characteristic for each of those sephira and each of those worlds that the tree of life that suit represents. And so when you're familiar with that, that's even more information that you get on the character of the small card. Okay, so we've got a bit of Kabbalistic information that would tend to make the 2 of Cups love and the 9 of Swords cruelty. And we've got whether it's a cardinal sign, a fixed sign, or a mutable sign, and where it would be in the zodiacal year as far as decans. So can we see the factors building up in the equation that will eventually be the definition of this card? Okay. Now look at the right-hand wheel. Because there are planets assigned to that decan and to that sign of the zodiac, and now it's starting to look like a little natal chart itself, because there'll be planets assigned to specific signs of the zodiac, which are in turn assigned to sephira on the tree of life, which are in turn attributed to Kabbalistic worlds. And the planets are assigned to the 36 decans in up to a point in a very logical and anal retentive way. Do you see the first arrow there to the left that's pointing sort of the 9 o'clock position, starting at 0 degrees Aries? But we're not going to start. That's where the cards start, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but that's not where the planets start. The planets start, and look at that bottom arrow. That starts over there at sort of the, 5 o'clock position? See the arrow pointing at the 5 of Wands? And there's the symbol of Saturn there. That's 0 degrees Leo, and 0 degrees Leo is a big start of the astrological year too. The solar year starts at 0 degrees Aries, but an astrological year, at least the Chaldean astrological start of the year, kicked off at the Cor de Leon, the heart of the lion. That was the astrological start of the year. So, does everybody see where that bottom arrow is pointing at the 5 of Wands? And you see that it says Saturn. Now, if we would move counterclockwise from that Saturn, we'd see it goes Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, and Luna, right? Okay, that order of planets is the descending order down the tree of life. Okay, starting with number 3. Number 3 is the sphere of Saturn. Number 4 is the sphere of Jupiter. Number 5 is the sphere of Mars. Number 6 is the sphere of the Sun. Number 7 is the sphere of Venus. Number 8 is the sphere of Mercury. And number 9 is the sphere of the Moon. That is the descending order of the planetary spheres on the tree of life, and that's the order that these planets are now assigned to the 36 decans. And that's how a planet gets dealt to a sign of the zodiac and to a decan. It's just like a dealer having a stacked deck. The deck is stacked with the Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, Luna, and then starting at 0 degrees Aries, the dealer just shuffles them out like that. They tried dealing them out all the way out at first, but somebody, there was one card left over at the end of it all. So if you'll notice at the 9 o'clock position in that one first arrow, there to the left, that there are 2 Marses. Mars is doubled up at the last decan of Pisces at the end of the solar year, and the first decan of Aries at the beginning of the solar year. When you double up Mars there at the end of the solar year and at the beginning of the solar year, all of the cards, all of the planets then fall into a perfect order, and everything comes out in the wash. Now, it's a real good question to ask. Why did you double up Mars at the end of the solar year and the beginning of the... Why? Doesn't seem to work. It's a thing that's hanging out in an unbalanced way in an otherwise perfectly balanced little world. And I will confess, I didn't think of it. Don't blame me, okay? I think we can blame McGregor Mathers, okay, for this. But on the other hand, I think we can also credit McGregor Mathers for this. Because the logic, or the explanation of the logic, was that at the end of the solar year and at the beginning of the solar year, the energy, the juice, the planetary juice is so prone to be completely extinguished just prior to the beginning of the new solar cycle that the universe, I guess, needs a little double spark of that Mars energy, in the same way that when a piston has completed its entire piston cycle and it comes back up for one last time, it just has enough energy to hit that top part of the stroke. There's been a little mechanism that's been triggered on its way up that will put it in contact with a spark plug. And that spark, when it hits the spark plug ignites, and the compressed gas of that last stroke is then exploded, and it drives the cycle again. A simpler way to look at it is a flywheel. A machine with a flywheel that once you get it started, the flywheel is heavier on one little section of the wheel, and the momentum of that imbalance carries it across to begin the cycle over again. So, look, I wouldn't have thought of that myself. I'm sorry, I would have thrown my hands up and said, this is all bullshit. But instead of that, McGregor Mathers doubles up Mars there and gives me the perfect out to go on with my life. So now we've got a formula for a small card, and somewhere in here I'll give us an example. God, this is a good book. Yeah, formula of a small card. The formula is exactly, if we want to get into formulaic talk, it would be N of S plus P in ZS equals SC, or the number of the suit plus the planet in the zodiac sign equals the small card. Okay? And the number of the suit carries with it its Kabbalistic spot on a tree of life, and that tree of life in a Kabbalistic world. Okay.
Can I just have the page number, please?
That page number is 206. Okay. So each card presents us with, some cards are really easy to figure out, because some planets are super happy to be in certain zodiac signs, and certain planets are just very unhappy in certain zodiac signs. And that, but the Kabbalistic factors start to complicate things, because the lower well, first of all, aces are out of the discussion, but 2s and 3s are all part of that supernal triad, that high above the abyss concept level of the tree of life, and they're all good cards. They're all just cards that you're happy to see. Even the 3 of Swords, which is called sorrow, isn't the boo-hoo, boo-hoo, that kind of sorrow. It's kind of a profound, a sacred melancholy that is not, even sorrow is good, okay? And then as we come down the tree of life, the lower we come, the more dangerous territory we start to get into. And if it's a 4 or a 5 or a 7 or an 8, they're imbalanced. They're on one side or the other of the tree of life. And unless there are extenuating planetary and zodiacal circumstances, that card is likely to be kind of a difficult card. Bless you. And I'm a bishop. So, every card is like a case of good news and bad news. 7 of discs, failure. The good news is we have Saturn in Taurus. Saturn is very happy in Taurus. It's one of the most stable matchups of sign and planet imaginable. The bad news is Saturn and Taurus find themselves in the 7th Sephira, Netzach, and Netzach holds a horribly imbalanced position on the tree of life. But the good news is Netzach is in the sphere of Venus, and Venus rules Taurus. The bad news is that all of this is in the lowest of the Kabbalistic worlds, Asaya. An environment so earthy that poor Venus is totally dethroned from her accustomed place in heaven. Add to that the fact that all of this is happening so low on the tree of life that the bad news is amplified to such a disastrous level that the good news is just not good enough to make a difference. And so we have failure. And you can work out almost every, there's only been a couple that I can't follow the logic on. I go, I must be a bad astrologer, but most of them you can. There's I wonder if I can quickly find it. There's a small card, the 7 of Cups, which Crowley calls debauch. Just look at this card if you can. Yuck. What happened to all that great cup stuff higher up in the tree of life? Doesn't sexy Venus like to show off in sexy Scorpio? She does. She likes to show off everywhere. Venus, however, is not well dignified in Scorpio and often embarrasses herself when she visits. If you ask, shouldn't she be happy in Netzach? Oh, that's the seventh sphere on the Tree of Life. She's a 7 there. Because it's the sphere of Venus. Sure she is. She's so happy she's making herself sick. This is much too much of what once was a good thing. And this low on the Tree of Life and this far off balance, there isn't a single influencing factor left to remind her the party's over. This card seems to be the next logical step in the abundance, luxury, and disappointment sequence. Those are the cards that lead right up in front of her. Can you see it rolling around the wheel there? 3 martinis is abundantly enough. 4 is just luxury showing off. 5 is disappointing because you're not getting high anymore, you're just getting smashed. But after 7, oh dear. The 7 of Cups is a stumbling dash to the lavatory just moments after you thought you were being irresistible to an attractive stranger. So, can we sort of see? Okay, you can work out each of these small cards. Not only that there's scales of color that go to each of the Kabbalistic worlds and goes to each of the position of each Sephirah. And it's a strict, and there's Kabbalistic color scales for the planets and the zodiac signs. And Crowley made Frida Harris painfully aware of the color scales that she could use for each of the cards. Now, when you have a nice clean set of those color scales in front of you, you might not immediately see the cards being dominated by those particular colors. But when you think about it, when you think about the watercolor nature of her paintings, she's mixing them and she's melding them, and that's why some of them just make you kind of sick to your stomach to see it, because she's mixed those colors, and as if she was just she and Crowley together without any rational left hemisphere examination of the cards, just working with the cards and the colors of the cards, the perfection of their Kabbalistic place in the universe is being communicated through the cones and rods of your eyes, through the colors. Working with the Thoth deck, needn't be an exercise in intellectual gymnastics. Just working with the colors gets you going. Okay, would you flip your handout over? One of the big Kabbalistic numbers is 4. Remember how I got 4 to be born out of number 10? Well, and number 10 is born out of 4. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 10. 4 is a big number in Kabbalah. We'll talk about 4 a lot tomorrow. It's the master number of the great name of God, Yod He Vav He. And there are 4 court cards that truly represent their element too. Just as the 36 small cards represent all 4 elements, so do the court cards. And the kings, or knights as they're called in the Thoth Tarot, represent the fiery aspect, the queens the watery aspect, the princes represent the air aspect, and the princesses represent the earth aspect. Okay? Now, princesses are called the throne of the aces. They're treated differently than the knight, queen, and king. So the kings, queens, and princes of the court cards, although they represent 30 degrees of the zodiac, They don't represent zodiac signs. They represent 20 degrees of one sign to 20 degrees of another, because it's the cosmic duty of elements to mix with each other. If the elements didn't mix with each other, and if the elements didn't contain within themselves little bits of other elements, there would be no attractor within a pure element to attract another element enough to bind together to create, in different ratios and proportions, the manifested universe. In other words, if they didn't mix together, if the elements didn't mix together, everything would either fly apart or smash together into mush. So in other words, this table is made of wood, and there's a lot of air in this wood, and there's water in this wood, and it took fire to a certain amount of fire, certain amount of earth in it. It's just a little bit different in makeup, in the balance of fire, water, air, and earth, just a little bit different than this computer case or my flesh. Can you see? It's the job of the elements to mix together, and without a little bit of another element in there, there's no attractor. They don't hold themselves together. So the court card family has to do what I call an adopt a decan program. Adding to this mix, instead of the chauvinistic thing of thinking as the king or the knight as the cardinal sign of the zodiac, this elemental mix says, no, we need equal time here. The queen represents mostly the cardinal signs. The prince represents mostly the fixed signs, and the king or the knight that gets so much deference in other parts of the Hermetic universe is now the mutable sign, or mostly mutable sign. So, cardinal fire would be Aries, right? And if the Queen of Wands, which would be assigned mostly the cardinal sign of Aries, if she ruled the entire sign of Aries, it would start at 0 degrees Aries and move all the way through Aries. But no, because she's an element, because she represents a crazy mix-up world of elements, because she signed on to the Adopt a Decan program, she backs up 10 degrees and picks up the last 10 degrees of Pisces and says, I'll take care of you. Last 10 degrees of Pisces, you will be my water attractor. You will help me hold the universe together. Okay. And the same thing for all of the other, all the 12 court card representatives. They started theirs. Oh, I'm cardinal. Well, no, I got to adopt this deck. They've all just shifted down. Can you kind of see it move like if we had two intersecting wheels? Okay. Does that make sense? And then you can use then your little wheel that shows where the tarot cards land there to see which small cards live in which court card. So each of us has a birthday card. Actually, we have 2 birthday cards. We've got a birthday card that represents our court card, which represents the 30-degree period that we were born in. And we've got a 10-degree card, or a small card, that represents the precise 10 degrees that we were born. And sometimes, especially if we're born at the very beginning or very end of a zodiac sign, we'll find that our small card, or even our court card, isn't the element of our sun sign. And so each of the, we're characterized by not only our sun cards in astrology, but by our court cards in the tarot. And sometimes our court cards tell us more character information about ourselves than our sun sign does. And when you read cards for people, I ask for their birthdays, so I know what court cards they are and what small cards they are, and I have a pretty good idea of kind of their character, not so much astrologically, but just what their court card is. And in this, have I plugged this book yet? I can't believe I've talked this much without plugging the book. In the book, for every court card, I do a very new agey kind of pop culture thing here that serious magicians just took me to task for this. But I'm a Queen of Cups, July the 11th. But I went through everybody's birthday cards to have celebrities and people from history and everything else who are also this. So Paul McCartney, Jacques Cousteau, John D. Rockefeller, Nikola Tesla, George Orwell, and Gerald Gardner. So just Madame Blavatsky and Mick Jagger. John Dean, Nelson Mandela, Mick Jagger, Prince of Wands. Oh, Aleister Crowley. Mick Jagger. Okay. Okay, so we sort of see how that is, and so in dealing with the personality of a court card, and with the breaking down of the personality attributes, which can then be used as metaphors for the magical or astrological meanings of the cards. There's a ton of information in the court cards and the small cards. And I've gone through seasons of my life that I've used the small cards and the court cards exclusively in not only reading my own cards, but doing other forms of tarot meditation and such. And it's probably the best exposition of the small cards of any deck of tarot cards in existence, the Thoth tarot cards. Not only, well, maybe with the exception of my own deck. But Harris has usually you can dig around in the image and find the astrological sign of the decan and the planetary attribution sign in the image of the card itself, and that's usually pretty helpful. This was the first book that I didn't actually intend to write. I wrote a book called The Magic of Thelema, which is now being in the second edition, expanded edition. It's called The Magic of Aleister Crowley. And in that book, I tried to write the book that I wish that I could have read when I first read Aleister Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice. And in a way, I just tried to explain to myself what Magic, Theory, and Practice was about, and it worked out pretty good, and I'm proud of the book, and it's been very well received. And I was a big fan of the Thoth Tarot and a fan of the Book of Thoth, and after a few years, that paragraph that I read to you started to make sense, and I could explain it to other people with, time for lunch breaks, but I never really considered, writing a commentary on the Thoth Tarot or the Book of Thoth at all. That it seemed many many years and a greater adeptship than I possessed. But I was at Book Expo America in Chicago, which is it's an international, truly book fair, and everybody in the universe writes books. So there's sports figures there, and there's celebrities and of different ilk, and 40,000 bookstore owners, publishers, etc. It's a big convention. And Judith Hawkins of New Leaf Distributing, that is the major occult, New Age, esoteric, Eastern mysticism type distributor in the United States, who is a friend of the family, said that she wanted to have a meeting with me at the Weiser booth, my publisher, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And because it's a convention, I thought we were going to all get together for a party or a dinner, or to plan some kind of silliness for the evening. And so I didn't think much of it. But I appear at the publisher's booth at the appointed hour, and she's made the same appointment with Donald Weiser and Betty Lundstedt of Weiser. And she sits down, and right there in the middle of the fair, and by this little kind of card table, Judith starts pitching this idea that the Thoth Taro is one of the most popular decks in the world, and has been from its first big issue in 69 or 70. And that in any given year, when it's in print, it's either the first, second, or third most best-selling deck in the world, and that it's the most beautiful deck in the world, and it's the heaviest deck in the world, and the only book that goes with that deck is Crowley's Thoth Taro, and it's the most understandable book in the world, and that Lon wrote this book that made magic in theory and practice make sense to her, and she thinks that Lon can write the book that will make the Thoth Taro and Crowley's Book of Thoth understandable. And all I wanted to do was to find out what kind of party we were going to that night. And I didn't say a word. And I just, what are you doing, Judith? And Dawn nodded, and Betty nodded, and said, yes, I think we should do it. So when can you have it, Lon? And honest, I'm so lazy. I'm a lazy man, and that's a big project. And it was, I didn't know when I could have it, for Christ's sake, and I gave him some arbitrary date, and I had it to him by that date. But I really didn't know what I had gotten myself into. It's such a huge, huge project, and it was an initiation. It was darn near a 3-year initiation, personal thing myself to write it, and I got up close and as personal as I can get with an inanimate object. And I was up all night on many nights looking at squinting through a magnifying glass at the biggest version of the cards that I could have, and it really was quite a mystical experience. But the most poignant part of that experience was having access to the personal correspondence between Crowley and Frieda Harris. And you can Google around and probably download most of it off the internet now, if you kind of know where to Google and how to surf. And it's very, very interesting. It's so interesting that it's almost voyeuristic to read it. And I usually kick off every chapter with an epigram that's a little piece of their correspondence back and forth to each other. And I kind of got to know Crowley through Harris, and how he related to Harris. And all of a sudden, all of the stuff that I read on the internet that Aleister Crowley tricked Frida Harris into doing the tarot, and he was a terrible taskmaster, and he was mean and made millions of dollars off of her while she died in poverty, and that he Svengali'd her into being part of the project. That's all bullshit. Frida Harris was the wife of Lord Percy Harris, and he was an MP. Okay, he was not a titled lord in so much as his father was a duke or something like that. Okay, but he was a lord, and she was Frida Lady Harris. She was Lady Harris, but she was not Lady Frida Harris. In order for her to be Lady Frida Harris, she would have to be the daughter of a duke or something like that. Okay. Obviously, she wasn't opposed to allowing people to call her Lady Frida Harris, but Lord Harris was the majority whip of the House of Commons, and the House Whip is the guy that oils the squeaky wheels and legislation. And in order to get legislation moving, the whip in the British government knows the skeleton in everybody's closet. So the whip position is almost like that of an intelligence officer too. And in other words, he subtly blackmails politicians into cooperating with legislation because he knows, where they spent that time with that little boy and things like that. And so he was a very busy man, and he allowed his freewheeling bohemian wife to have an almost Agatha Christie kind of character lifestyle. I mean, she bobbed her hair and dyed it red, and she hung out with artists and wild people. She was a theosophist. She was a student of Rudolf Steiner. She was a co-mason. She was, and she knew who Aleister Crowley was, and she met Aleister Crowley at a party hosted by a mutual friend. And she could see how frail he was in those years. This is the late 30s. She could see how frail he was getting. And she pretty much knew that he was a pretty smart guy. And she told him at one of their early meetings that he was going to die pretty soon, and that it would certainly be a shame if he were to die without writing kind of a magnum opus whereby he told absolutely everything he knew about everything he knew. And that she would like to see him write that big book before he died. And Crowley said, well, I've written that big book. I've got tons of, my book 4, and I've already done that. And she came back with, what have you done lately? Don't you know any more? Haven't you put anything in perspective in the last 20 years? You're different now. You're facing the Grim Reaper, old man. Aren't you putting this stuff into perspective? Aren't you wrapping your mind around a big picture that you haven't realized it, before? Aren't you smarter than you've ever been in your whole life? What are you doing sitting here smoking cigars? She says, I want you to write that book. And if you write a book, I'll illustrate it for you. And Crowley chewed on that for a while. And I came back with her and said, no, I've written all the big books I'm going to write. I'm collecting my letters. I'm going to publish those in a book that he wanted to call Alistair Explains Everything, which is just his letters back and forth to people. And he said, but I tell you what, if you're an artist, why don't you take just a standard deck of kind of like gypsy tarot cards, and why don't you just sort of tweak the images a little bit, make a quick and dirty tarot deck, and I'll write the little white booklet that goes with it, and you can say you wrote it. Because Crowley was an undischarged bankrupt and wasn't even in charge of his own assets at that time, and any money that came in officially would go to his creditors. Crowley had no money, he had no resources, he had no assets. So he said, I'll write you a good little white booklet, and you can exhibit those paintings and have this as the gallery booklet. And if they get turned into cards, it can be a little white booklet, and we'll split the money under the table. And Frida came back to him and said, no, I don't want to do that. But that got her thinking. And she came back to Crowley with this idea. She says, I'll join your AA. I'll be your magical student. I'll join your OTO, which at that time wasn't a lodge with lodge meetings and stuff like that. The OTO, there was an OTO operating in California, and that's about all. The OTO was kind of in his head. It wasn't manifesting in very many places on earth. And I'll join your OTO. And I will pay you X pounds a week to teach me magic, just for your time and whatever resources and books. It wasn't a stipend even. It was just like this for your trouble. And it was generous, but it wasn't all that much. But it was a little something. It was more cigars and cognac, And Crowley said, well, yeah, I'll do that. And she said, oh, and one other thing. I want you to write that book that I was talking to you about. I want you to organize it the way you sort of organize magic and theory and practice. I want you to organize it along the lines of the Taro. Kabbalistically, I want you to organize the chapters and everything Kabbalistically along the lines of the Taro. And I will provide you 78 full-color watercolor paintings to illustrate that book. And Crowley finally said, okay. So if you read, Crowley said, okay, it'll only take 6 months. It took the better part of 5 years, okay? During wartime, through the Blitz and the troop trains and the rationing and Crowley living out in the country and Frida having to visit on a train, just trooping the portfolios back and forth and letters back and forth, which we have, which are wonderful. It is so romantic. It is just right out of a Merchant Ivory film. It is just, I got to see this on the BBC someday. This is very, very romantic. And but it probably wasn't romantic sexually, because Crowley was in his late 60s and Frida was in her early 60s, and it probably wasn't one mad adulterous romp between the two, as much as we'd like to think. But Frida got her money's worth, and so did we. Frida was a specific kind of artist. Her style, as we're going to get into, her style was based on a theoretical geometry that Rudolf Steiner and the students of Rudolf Steiner were toying with at the time. And it could be toyed with even graphically. And it's called projective synthetic geometry. And I don't pretend to understand it. I really don't. But what I do understand is this much. In Euclidean geometry, if you have a circle and a dot in the middle of the circle, the circumference is equidistant at every point to the dot in the center. Does that make sense? And in Euclidean geometry, if you move the dot in the center, say to the right, the radius decreases as it moves toward the circumference and increases as it moves away from the circumference. And all of the relative positions do the same. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Perfectly logical. That would mean that in Euclidean geometry, graphically, as you look into a painting toward the horizon, there would be a vanishing point. You know, where train tracks would, you know, okay. And as the vanishing point moves around, so would the different lines within the thing. Projective synthetic geometry posits that the center of the circle and the circumference can occupy the same position at the same moment. See, if they had television, they wouldn't be thinking of this stuff, you know. So, examples of projective synthetic geometry, and you can say it both ways, because both ways it's referred to, projective synthetic and synthetic projective. Usually, if you would imagine a canvas, and I'd set up a whole bunch of push pins or tacks at the top and the bottom, and I would string rubber bands, okay, to form a nice grid, okay, from top to bottom. Do the same thing on the side and from side to side. And a normal painting would be projected against that grid, okay. But if somehow or other you could project that grid onto the rubber bands themselves, and then just reach in with your fingers and go like that, those lines would stretch as if you were stretching at the fabric of space. And in projective geometry, you're also stretching at the fabric of time. It gets really cool, okay? But this idea of the circumference and the dot in the middle occupying the same position at the same time, with the artwork obliging your mind to go someplace it's never gone before in a flat thing, the first thing that I was talking about this morning, okay? That's what Frida was doing with art. And what Crowley was doing with religion, what Crowley was doing with magic and philosophy, was almost the same thing philosophically as Frida was doing graphically. There's two infinites in Thelema. Well, there's probably three. But the two big ones are Nuit, the star goddess, the infinitely expanded universe, the goddess of the night sky, the infinite outness, and the only way that we can even wrap our minds around the infinite outness is to draw a big circle and say, that's it, that's the big expanded universe. And even in Egyptian art, she's this arched goddess. Looks like she's a big blue basketball player, just incredibly tall, you know. And the second infinite is the infinite point in the very center. The universe and all concepts ultimately contracted to literally just position. It doesn't even occupy space, but it's just position. And these two infinites, infinite out and an infinite in. And because both of these infinities are infinitely everywhere, even though she's really big and he's really small, they're infinitely touching, infinitely everywhere. And this is the big sign, okay? It's the biggest in and out in the world, okay? And that the field, the vibration, this universal vibration of the infinite small and the infinite large, the infinite in and the infinite out, touching infinitely everywhere, the vibration created by that, the ecstatic friction created by that creates a vibration which is the field of operation for the entire universe to manifest in. And that's their sun, Ra-Hoor-Khuit. Can you see projective synthetic geometry with its, and Crowley's Thelema with its? It's just such a perfect match of art and philosophy. It was just absolutely perfect. And Crowley set Frida to work at that. And they had to go back and forth on a few things. She hated to draw faces. And Crowley busted her really bad for that. And she busted him for writing stuff that nobody could understand. She told him his work could be easier understood if he wrote it in Sanskrit. But together, they hammered out these paintings as he hammered out the Book of Thoth. And if you've read the Book of Thoth and got a lot out of it, that's fine. And if you've read the Book of Thoth and it went completely over your head, that's fine too. If you've read the Book of Thoth 50 times, that's fine too. Read it again. It will be a different book. It's a different book every time you read it. And you'll swear you've never read that sentence before. You'll swear you never wrapped your mind around that one concept before. You'll swear that the words have morphed into other words as that book sat on your shelf. It's a magic book. And it truly is the only true, best commentary on the Book of Thoth in existence. Okay? This is just to hold off and to get you into it, okay? And to make me happy because I've made no further provisions for my family's future. So, like I always say, I'm asking you to buy it, but I'm not asking you to read it, okay? So, Crowley and Harris, neither one of them lived to see the deck published as a deck. There was one really crude sort of blue and white version that somebody tried to make up. They both saw that and said, no, that's not going out in the public. Harris exhibited the cards, I think, in 3 major exhibitions. Crowley's name wasn't mentioned in any of them. She asked him, please stay away from that. And he was good enough to stay away. Crowley, of course, died in 47, and Harris lived, I think, until the 60s. I think so, yeah. And she moved to Ceylon. No, excuse me, she moved to Kashmir and lived on a houseboat on Percy's pension. So anything that you read on the internet that he died or he died rich and she died in poverty is untrue. It was probably a pretty pleasant little golden years. She was with Crowley the day before he died. She was at the funeral. She organized an after-funeral curry at her home in London. Crowley loved curry. He loved cooking curry for people and then watching them eat it. But together, at least as far as I'm concerned, they created the single most stunning and magnificent magical object art in history. And it truly is the picture book of not only Western Hermetics, but a particular magical concept that Crowley held in particular reverence. Along about 1913, 1914, Crowley wrote a book called the Book of Lies. And in the Book of Lies, he it's just all single chapters, self-contained single chapters. Some of them have a loose connection with each other. But they're like, some of them are short little rituals, some of them are funny little poems, some of them are just like haikus on steroids. And but there's one chapter that he talks about writing that he said he had a problem with, and that he included it in the manuscript and then took it out and then put it back and then rewrote it a little bit and took it out and put it back. And he wrote that he finally put it back in to the manuscript before it went to the publisher, just to show contempt for his audience. And the book was published, and a short while after it was published, he gets a knock at the door, and at the door is a German guy named Taro, and with a big kind of handlebar mustache. He's an opera singer. The guy sang tenor. He sang Wagner. He knew Wagner at Bayreuth. And he happened to be not only an opera singer, but a music hall performer. And he was also a spy for the Prussian government, sent to England to spy on the daughter of Karl Marx. Isn't this romantic? Isn't Jesus? It's so cool, these characters. And he's told, he was also the head of this organization called Ordo Templi Orientis, who had given Crowley an honorary degree a year or so earlier when Crowley was being sued by MacGregor Mathers. That's a long story. Crowley was officially in the OTO, but it was just a piece of paper or in his collection. And Royce said, "You have published our supreme secret, the secret of our 9th degree, the secret of sex magic." And Crowley said, "Well, where did I publish that?" And he says, "It's in that Book of Lies." He said, "No, I don't even know your secret. I don't know what you're talking about. I certainly didn't print it in the Book of Lies." Royce gets the Book of Lies out of Crowley's library. He opens up to a particular page. He says, "There it is. That's our secret." And we're pissed. And Crowley looks at the thing, and it's that chapter that he had a problem with, that he put in and out and in and out and in and out. That's kind of funny right there. The second. And He says, how's that the secret? I don't understand. And Royce said, well, this means this, and this means that, and this means this. And it was such a dynamic and elegantly simple magical secret that Crowley instantly recognized the universality, the profundity of this particular secret. And it's not like a secret like take 2 parts of this and 2 parts of that and you mix it together and drink it, but in another way it is. But what it truly is the secret that is the sexual secret, if you want to use that term, the sexual secret behind all creation. Okay, not only human creation, not only the creation of stars and galaxies and matter and energy, but the creation of anything a willed intent can stamp on a proper medium and bring to pass. Okay, and insofar as people do this to make other human beings, to make babies, to replicate ourselves, to bring into existence a vessel that's capable of housing an incarnating soul, insomuch as using that as a metaphor, it's sex magic. Okay, but we could almost as easily say it's astrophysics magic. We could just as easily say it's subatomic particle magic. Okay, the sex magic thing, you just throw that out so you get arrested. Ever since that day, ever since the big light bulb went off in Crowley's head, that sex magic became his main number one. He said all of the other magical techniques, all of the things we're studying are now just attachments to this one huge, glorious magical tool. To him, it was the Holy Grail. It really was what the Holy Grail was about. In the most Wagnerian sense of the term, it was the Holy Grail. And he tries to tell this story in the Thoth Taro, and truly that's what today's talk is really about, and what all of everything else has so far has just been the prelude. So I want to take us through the 22 cards of the trumps, and the story will be told in our examination of the trumps, and we'll find out a whole bunch of other things about the trumps too. But just there's one very important thing that I hope we can all get out of it today, and so I'm alerting you to that point. I'd like you to write something down. The 3 cosmic players. Responsible for creating quote, the mode of fulfillment of the great work, unquote. Are Mercury, good guess, but no. Sort of. Mercury, Earth, there's your salt. And the sun. There's your sulfur. The three cosmic players responsible for creating the mode of fulfillment of the great work are Mercury, Earth, and the Sun. And we can dig that out of Crowley's Book of Thoth, worded pretty much like that. But this next thing I want you to write down, we can dig out of the Book of Thoth by Crowley just like this. Number 2, the climax of the descent of matter is the signal for the redintegration, redintegration, redintegration by spirit. Now, for years, I thought that was a typo because I did not recognize the word redintegration. I thought it was the typo for reintegration, and other typos appear in the book, you know, and I, because I looked up redintegration in my dictionary, and I couldn't find it. And it wasn't until I was writing this book that I got a hold of a 1900-something Collier's dictionary, 2-volume dictionary set, looked it up, and there it was. And it's an archaic word that means return to former estate.
Sorry, was that estate or state?
Estate. So the idea of the climax of the descent of matter, in other words, matter hitting dead bottom of the barrel, okay? The climax of the descent of matter is the signal for the redintegration by spirit. In other words, that causes spirit to be activated to start the entire process all over again. In astronomy or in physics, and believe me, what I know I see on Nova on television is that in the life cycle of massive stars, the gravity gets so intense that the elements in the center of the star start getting denser and denser and denser and denser until it hits iron. And in a way, iron is the climax of the descent of matter. And when it hits iron, they have what they call a bump. And that bump creates a supernova. It hits dead center and then it explodes out like that. And from that supernova, then another generation of stars can form once the gravity starts taking over and things. Can you see the wondrousness of the climax of the descent of matter? It's like things in the whole universe just can't get any slower. It's as low as you can go. It's the lowest of the low. Just like the element earth is in the Taro. Just like the princesses, the lowest of the low, the earth elements of their, just like the tens in the small card suits, just like Malkuth, just like you and me. Okay.